that he got a good report. So he said, that was some good news, that was an answer to prayer, and he said, you know, that was a hallelujah.
Got a call from the doctor that, I don't know whether it's Friday or whether, there must have been, some of the big x-rays, they found a spot in the little part of his lung. So she went in yesterday for some more tests, we don't have the results on that today.
Under the dollar?
Huh?
Under the dollar?
My wife.
Oh, I'm Vicky, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
And, they shot over some of that radioactive stuff, which will bind to this cancer. So we just don't know yet, just keep on the prayer.
We need to keep her in prayer, because never know, one of those things, I always rejoice when the Lord answers, and it just ends up, it's nothing, but, you know, be sure and remember Vicki and Jim and Arnie. Alex. Yeah, that's what I thought I'd already said that. Okay. Are there any other prayer requests?
Remember me. I started my treatment Saturday, so I'm on my 5th day.
Okay. And how long will that take?
I don't know.
Okay.
Depends
Let's
on
just
how-
pray that it works quickly. So we need to remember Wilma and, you know, of course, those that are traveling, I think, Doug and Mary are still traveling, so we need to remember them. Of course, it's always hard when you have to leave those grandkids. It's good when you go out there, it's when you have to leave and come back, it's not fun.
Let's remember Sheila. Sheila.
Oh, Sheila, yeah, I need to remember Sheila. All right, well, let's open with a word of prayer, and I'm gonna be very kind to you tonight. I'm not gonna lead the singing. I'm gonna have somebody special come up and lead the singing for us. Heavenly Father, we just praise you for this day. We just thank you, Lord, for all your blessings, for the ability, Lord, to come together, the freedom that we have to worship you. And pray for these prayer requests for Alex, especially, Lord, in this situation. Just pray that you'd be with him, that he would heal quickly and there wouldn't be anything serious, that you'd be with all these others, Lord, with Wilma and Jim and R.D. and all these others, Father, that every prayer request that's been mentioned, that we just, with Melinda and Sheila, that God, each one of them, you just be with them in a special way. And I know on our hearts, Father, each of us have burdens and have ones, loved ones, and friends that we have in mind also. So for those unspoken prayer requests, I ask, Lord, that you just be with each one, that, Father, in your own way, you answer according to your will, that those that are suffering, that you might help them know and feel your presence, and that, Lord, those that don't know you as Savior, that, Father, in this time of trial or stress, that, Lord, they might turn to you, and that there might be one to witness to them. Just thank you for this service that we're going to have tonight. Pray that you bless in this music and study, and just pray that you be with our church, Father, that it would continue to grow, and that in everything and all things we give you honor and glory. For it's in Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. Try to turn that off so nobody has to listen.
Let's turn to number 18, Doryland Way. Program opening, 26, the last mile of the way. And then after this, I'll turn it back to Chuck. If I walk in the pathway of duty, if I work till the close of the day, I shall see the great King in His beauty. When I've gone the last mile of the way, when I've gone the last mile of the way, I will rest at the close of the day. And I know there are joys that await me when I've gone the last mile of the way. If for Christ I proclaim the glad story, if I seek for His sheep gone astray, I am sure He will show me His glory when I've gone the last mile of the way. When I've gone the last mile of the way, I will rest at the close of the day. And I know there are joys that await me when I've gone the last mile of the way. Here the dearest of ties we must sever. Tears and sorrow are seen every day. But no sickness, no sighing forever. When I've gone the last mile of the way. When I've gone the last mile of the way, I will rest at the close of the day. And I know there are joys that await me when I've gone the last mile of the way. And in fear I have earnestly striven, and have tried always will to obey, dwelling hands for the rapture of heaven, when I've gone the last mile of the way. When I've gone the last mile of the way, I will rest at the close of the day. And I know there are joys that await me when I've gone the last mile of the way.
Trying to spare you by turning this microphone on. While we were singing that, kind of in between songs, I gave this hymnal to Alex test, and it passed. It opened up to 174. You know, it's kind of, I was thinking about Alex, and I know so many times I'll open up there it is. Open up a hymnal wherever you're at in this auditorium, and it'll come to 174. We were singing that song in Durham, I think, but he came and quickly adopted it. I think it's been first thing out of his mouth Sunday morning when Jasper's up there, 174. And we all know what that means. Ray, did you have a song?
touch of hand so kind and tender. They're leading me in the path that I must trod. I'll have no fear, for Jesus walks beside me. For I'm sheltered in the arms of God. So let the storms they hide, the dark clouds rising, worry me, for I'm sheltered safe within the arms of God. He walks with me, and nothing shall be. For I'm sheltered in the arms of God. Soon I shall hear the call from heaven's portal. Come home, my child, it's the last mile you must try. I'll fall asleep and wake in God's sweet heaven. For I'm sheltered in the arms of God. So let the storms they hide, the dark clouds rising, worry me, for I'm sheltered safe within the arms of God. He walks with me, and nothing shall harm me. For I'm sheltered in the arms of God. For I'm sheltered in the arms of God.
Well, that's good. Uh, Is there anybody else that has anything on their heart, or anybody have a special with, Alabama back up there, if y'all want to sing? I know, I think Tony and Joyce were working on one, so, no, did I get that wrong? Maybe it was Tony.
Chuck, I'd
Well-
just like to say that I'm glad tonight that I'm sheltered in the arms of God. I just can't imagine my life without God, And I've had a wonderful week, and I've basked on the service from Sunday night all week long. I mean, when the Holy Spirit's present, you get a charge, and you get able to go on for the week and I just get up rejoicing, and I was just still rejoicing today. And, a long time ago, I used to be in so many services like that. And I just think it's pretty awesome
I
myself.
do too.
So I love the Lord tonight, and I just want to do His will.
Amen. Well, I tell you what, that was a great service, when it was winding down, you didn't really see as much coming as what was there, but, when everybody got down here to the front, it was, I'll tell you what, it was just, started all over again, and it was a blessing, so, yeah, I enjoyed it too. We're gonna be in Matthew chapter 26. So obviously, by looking at this book, you can tell we're almost to the end of Matthew, maybe. We're just kind of wanted to take a minute before we get started on Matthew 26 to say, you know, what we talked about last Wednesday night and the week before, you know, about, and even before that, what we talked about on this Olivet Discourse as far as the dispensational time, you know, talking about being premillennial. There are people that will disagree with that. And they will say, you know, all of that, the way that we looked at it, you know, that's just wrong. And just, you know, I have studied it. I've heard arguments. I've heard people that are theologians arguing both sides. And, you know, I remember when I first got saved, I went and bought a book. And it was what happened when I first got saved, I didn't know anything about Christianity or anything. I didn't know anything about like Archie Bunker. You know, what I knew about Christianity was all wrong. But I began to buy these books. I listened to these guys that I worked with, and, you know, they were all in seminary, and I was just there reaping the benefits of listening to them talk about what they had done in seminary that day, you know, and Bible college. And so I bought this book, and it was by Dwight Pentecost, and it was Things to Come. And from that, he explained in the very first part of it, he said, you know, the major problem with the way people interpret Scripture is they don't interpret literally. And what we did when we went through this, we used a literal interpretation. And most people will use an allegorical, you know, and it just goes in. I've just heard wild things come out of that. And so we'll go a little bit in more detail on that when we start Revelation, because we did that before. We talked about how the, you know, the literal translation just makes more sense than the other views. And if you translate it literally, you know, it's just like, how do you determine then, if you start going into allegory, what prophecies are and what prophecies are not to be translated one way or the other? Because it's just like, you know, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. It said, Micah, that Jesus was going to be born in Bethlehem. Well, spiritualize that. I mean, he was born in Bethlehem. You know, and it said that he was going to come and and it had over 300 different prophecies about Jesus in his lifetime that he fulfilled. And which one of those were not literal? So, you know, therefore, on all these others, why would you all of a sudden take them allegorically? So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, because there are different views, and there are, you know, and I respect and love those people. It's not that I'm going to break fellowship with somebody just because they don't have the same millennial view or tribulation view. I believe in a pre-tribulation, pre-millennial. That's what I've always taught, well, I always understand it. And the theologians that I listen to and follow, you know, they're almost 100% that way. The thing that's encouraging to me is, you know, people from the other viewpoint will say that, well, that's just been a recent deal, just in the last 100 years or so. No, if you go back to the early, the 100, 200, 300s, you know, the very earliest church and the writings of those, of Justus and Hippocles and all these others, the early church fathers, all their writings were premillennial. So, you know, I think I'm in good company there. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of bring that up. In chapter 26, we're going to see now, still on Wednesday, we will see a little retro. Matthew's going to take us back to Saturday at part of this, but most of this first part is going to occur on Wednesday. It's been a long day when you think about it, because if you think about, he comes in to Bethany, goes to the house of Simon the leper, and then he goes, that's on Saturday. On Sunday, he's still in Bethany, but he's over at Mary and Martha and Lazarus's, you know. And then Monday, he makes the triumphant entry. Tuesday, you know, when he's going into the city, he curses the fig tree, goes into the temple and cleanses it, so that when he goes in Wednesday and he begins to teach, the temple is fit to be taught in. He cleansed it so that when he went in it, it was going to be his Father's house. It was going to be a house of prayer. It was going to be a house where the truth could be taught. It wasn't going to be a den of thieves and robbers that was in there at that time. So when he ran all that out, he went back on Wednesday to teach, and he went into the temple, then it was a place where he could teach and where the truth could be taught. So chapters 20 through 25 are all on Wednesday. You can see a large portion of Matthew's book, and the other, Mark and Luke, are also a large portion of those around that. We get to chapter 26 and we see this brings to a conclusion the whole book. This is what the whole book of Matthew was leading toward, was the cross. It's what the whole Bible is leading to. If you look in the Old Testament, all the Old Testament prophecies, all the Old Testament customs, all the Old Testament stories, what are they pointing towards and leading towards is the cross. The cross is the center point of history. And when it says his history, it is his story. It is the story of Jesus Christ. And the dividing point is the cross of Christ. That's what all these things, that's where it was all heading. That's the most important thing for you and me. So as we begin to see this coming to a head here, in verse 21 of verse 26, it says, "And it came to pass, when Jesus had finished all these things, he said unto his disciples, Ye know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified." Now this is the fourth time in the Gospel of Matthew, at least, that he tells them that he is going to be crucified, that he is going to be, he says, after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified. He tells them again, told them back in chapter 16, that, you know, not only would he be crucified, but in 3 days he would rise again. And again in chapter 17, and again later on, you know, this is the fourth time that he brings up the fact that he is going to be crucified. The disciples, you know, are still kind of wary, especially after the triumphant entry, all the things that have happened and everything. They're still in their mind having kind of a hard time grasping anything but the kingdom coming and coming quickly. But you notice Jesus says that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover. Now we're going to go into a lot more detail about this, because there are basically 6 feasts that they observed and everything, and the Passover was kind of the highlight of it. And the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were both right there together. The Passover was always on the 14th day of Nisan. On the 10th day of Nisan, they would go out and they would select a lamb. Each member of the head of the household would go out, select a lamb, take it into their household, and for 4 days it would be in that house. On the 4th day, the 14th of Nisan, they would take that lamb and slaughter it and sprinkle the blood on the altar, take it back to the house, and along with other things, it would be cooked and eaten, and it had to be eaten before midnight that night. And that was, you know, in observance of the Passover. So he says, you know that in 2 days is the Passover. We know he was crucified, our Lord was crucified in AD 33. And in that year, the Passover, or the 14th of Nisan, just happened to be on a Friday. So we know that when he was crucified, and notice, you go over and over in the Scripture, and Paul will tell you, he'll say, you know, that Jesus was our Passover lamb. That he was, just like when John saw him coming, what did he say? Behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. He was a lamb that was to be sacrificed. And that's the whole purpose of his coming, was to make an atonement for sin. We know from the historian Josephus that in just a couple of years earlier, they had a census of the lambs that were slaughtered. And in that year, there were 256,500 lambs. Can you imagine that? 256,500 lambs that were slaughtered. It said that for each lamb, there had to be at least 10 people to partake. There could be up to 20, but no more than 20, there had to be at least 10. So by that, you know that in Jerusalem during this time, there was over 2.5 million people. It was swollen. People came from all over. This was, the big holy day of the year, the Day of Atonement and also the Passover. The Passover was the one that they looked forward to because the days of Feast of Unleavened Bread, which started on the 15th of Nisan, went to the 21st. It lasted 7 days. So after that. So anyway, we know that Jesus was crucified on a Friday. At one time, I played with the idea that he was crucified on a Wednesday, tried to come up with justification. Then after I found out some things about how the Jews determined days and nights and everything, I had a hard time placing the 3 days and 3 nights, where it says that he's going to be 3 days and 3 nights, just like Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, going from Friday to Sunday. But we'll get to that when we get there, and it's interesting. So anyway, from all of that, but he tells them, remember this is still on Wednesday, he says that he's to be betrayed. In verse 3 of chapter 26, it says, Then assembled together the chief priests, the scribes, elders of the people, unto a palace of the high priest, and called Caiaphas, who was called Caiaphas, and consulted them they might take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. But they said, Not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people. Now when Jesus was, we'll stop right in verse 5. You notice right after this, he says he's going to be crucified. So what immediately happens is, he says, in the house of Caiaphas, all these were gathered, and what are they doing? They're plotting Jesus' death. No big surprise there. Because ever since Jesus was born, from the minute he was born, people tried to kill him. Because you remember when he was born in Bethlehem, when when the Magi showed up, and came to the king, what did Herod do? He went and killed every baby in that region from 2 years old on down, just to make sure that he got that baby, that king that was going to be there, So even from his birth. And then you think about all the times that they sought to kill him. And he said, my time's not yet come. Or else he would just be able to get out of it and just, be able to get right through it and away from it, because his time was not come. You notice in this, it says that the day that they did not want him to die is the day that he's going to die. Isn't that interesting? Man can plot, man can plan, man can come up with all these ideas about when we want to do something, but when God has a plan and when he has a timetable, it is going to go exactly according to his timetable. On the very time that Caiaphas and the high priest and all these said, we do not want him killed because the people will be in an uproar. Why were they so anxious to kill Jesus? Well, one of the reasons, you think about it, Caiaphas, the high priest, you know a little bit about him. He had been high priest for several years, and you didn't at this time become the high priest by descent from the tribe of Levi, or from the priestly order. That's what it was supposed to be. But just like everything else to do with government, in this case the Roman government, that position was bought and paid for. So if you wanted to be a high priest, then you could come up with enough money. In order, though, to keep the Jews from rioting and having a problem with it, because he did not have any of the high priest, he wasn't from the tribe of Levi, he wasn't from the line of the high priest either, from Aaron. And so what he did, you remember the high priest before him was Annas. Annas had a daughter, and it said that, if you could marry the daughter, and she had to be a virgin between 12 and 12 and a half years old. So Caiaphas not only bought the position, but to appease the Jews, he married one of Annas' daughter. And so, it kind of appeased them, but he was quite a politician. But in every instance, when you see him mentioned in the scriptures, he's always doing one thing. He's always trying to capture or kill Jesus. That is in the scriptures, that's what he is portrayed as the one that is always trying to connive and to do everything to try to get Jesus, and get a hold of him. So they are in this house. Now, we're going to go back now in verse 6. It says, now when. You notice when we started in verse 1, it says, and it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these things. In other words, chapters 24 and 25, all the things that were in there about all of the discourse, when he finished those things, he said to his disciples, now down in verse 6, we're going to go back to Saturday. And you say, well, that's kind of odd. But in the timeline, and it fits in with John and Mark, this that we're going to read here actually happened on a Saturday. So it says, we're going to go back from Wednesday now back to Saturday. So now when Jesus was in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat at meat. But when the disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, to what purpose is this waste? For the ointment might have been sold for much and given to the poor. When Jesus understood it, he said unto them, why trouble ye the woman? For she hath wrought a good work upon me. For ye have the poor always with you, but but me ye have not always. For in that she hath poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also that this woman hath done be told for her a memorial of her. So, when you look at this, why would Matthew take and insert this in here? We've been sticking with Matthew. Matthew, remember when we started, we said Matthew is primarily written to the Jews. The primary purpose is to present Jesus as king. And he always presents Jesus in a regal or a very respectful way. And it says in here, that when he was in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper. Well, we know from John and Mark that was back on Saturday, that he was in the house. Now, Simon the leper wasn't a leper anymore, or he wouldn't have been in his house. So, pretty much the only cure for leprosy back in that day was Jesus Christ. So Simon was probably healed by Jesus. We don't have the record of it, but, there are over 10 Simons in the New Testament. Simon was like John or Joe or, something like that. It was a very common name back in that day. And, it says that he had been a leper, but it says while they were there came to him a woman having an alabaster box. Now, who was this woman? Well, fortunately, John tells us it was Mary. That Mary and Martha and Lazarus were at this. The 12 disciples were there. So there was a pretty good group in this house, along with probably others that Simon had asked to come to the house, to come to this dinner. And it's kind of interesting when you think about it. Now, you got to remember, this was back in the day when they would walk and they would be out in the hot of the day. They would be in the dusty areas and everything. And when they would be invited to come to somebody's house for dinner, they didn't have deodorant like we do today, And what is deodorant? It's a deodorant. In other words, it's just a smell you put on to cover up the worst smell, It was common in that day to when somebody came into the house, they would put a light amount of fragrance on them, as they sat down and reclined at a table. So it wasn't uncommon but what was very uncommon about this was the price of the ointment and the amount. This was amounted to an act of worship that Mary did here. Mary knew and understood what the disciples kept missing. Just a couple of verses earlier, later on, Jesus tells them, he's going to go and he's going to be crucified. Mary knew it earlier. This was a memorial precursor to his burial. And she takes this and opens this alabaster. It's a deal about 12 ounces, has a long neck. And what they do is they break that neck, or else there would be something to unstop it. And in John, according to John, not only did she pour it on his head, but also on his feet. So 12 ounces, and it was pure nard. 12 ounces, it's about, from Mark, we understand that it was a year's wages. So that's a lot of money. And when she does this as an act of worship. She wasn't considering, that I need to save this. I'll take 2 ounces, or I'll take an ounce and put on, or I'm going to do this. When she worshiped fully and wholly. She knew that her Lord was getting ready to suffer and to die. And so, in adoration of him and in pure worship, she does this. Now, what was Martha doing? Yeah, she was in the kitchen. She was not happy that Mary was out there, and if she knew she had just blown a year's wages worth of stuff, I don't know what her reaction would have been to that, but she wanted help. What did Jesus tell Martha? He says, look, she desires more important things. Because, you don't have me with you always. And he was telling them that his time with them was going to be very short. This was on a Saturday. And the next Friday, literally less than a week later, he's going to die. He's going to be crucified. And so in this, it says that in verse 8, he says, but when his disciples saw it, they got indignant. Now we also know from Mark and that this was Judas Iscariot. But the other disciples chimed in with it. But Judas Iscariot was the main one that was talking about, why are we letting this waste? Now, was he really interested in that? No, we know from other places it says that he had the bag. All he was thinking about, he wasn't going to give that money to the poor. We're going to see in just a few minutes that he's going to sell Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. What he wanted to do was take that money and put it in that bag, and he was seeing that things in Jesus' ministry wasn't going the way he saw it, the way he thought it should go. And in the back of his mind, he's thinking, I'm going to get all this for myself that I can. So his complaint against her, or do you ever notice how people do that? They always say, when they want to do something greedy or something underhanded, they'll always throw some act of charity or some act of kindness in there saying, well, this could have been given to the poor and helped the poor. That's not what's on their minds at all. There are times when we need to give to the poor, we need to help them. Remember last week we just talked about, he said, when did you see me? Or when did we see you in, need or hungry or thirsty, or when did we see you in prison or in the hospital, or, this or that? And there are times when we are supposed to, but there are also times when the Lord may lay it on our heart to worship through giving in such a way to such a thing that may seem wasteful to others. But if it's for the Lord's honor and glory, we're to do it. And if we are in the right spirit as a family of God, we'll accept it and understand it. We won't question it. Because there are times when people will say, I feel that the Lord wants me to give this or do this, and I want it for this or that or whatever. It's the Lord's money. If he says that's what we're to do with it, then that's what we're to do. If God puts it on somebody's heart, we're not to question that. If we know and we're certain that that's from the Lord, you know, there are times when people, it's, you know, a lot of churches have business meetings and they get in physical fights and get mad at each other and huff and puff and, you know, yell. That's not the way it's supposed to go. And it's just because it's a deal of pride, it's a deal of power, it's a deal of anything that has to do, you know, the main thing is it's not ours. When we give it to the Lord, it's His. It's not ours to begin with, you know. When He says to give it, we're to give it. And a lot of times the way we kind of do it, we think, yeah, well, this week, you know, what can I get by with? I don't need this week, you know. That's what we feel often put it. That's not the way it's to be. We're just to ask the Lord. A lot of it will go to the poor. In this instance, you know, because of the need that they had for Jesus, she did an act of worship. Might have seemed expensive and extravagant, but Jesus didn't condemn it. So that's how we know for sure that there was nothing wrong with what she did. And it says in verse 10, when Jesus understood it, He said, "Why trouble ye the woman? For she hath wrought a good work upon you. For ye have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always. For in that she hath poured the ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel is preached in the whole world, there shall also this, that is, woman hath done, be told for a memorial of her." So He's saying that, you know, don't bother her. So the poor is going to be with you always. Do we still have poor today? Yeah, that's all you hear about. I mean, it still boggles my mind. I will say something to Paula. We'll be watching the news or something, and they'll say Tyson donated 2 tractor trailer loads full of chicken to the poor to feed the hungry. Or Procter and Gamble gave, you know, $100,000. Recently, Arvest, last year they were going to do 1 million pounds of food, and I think they met their goal or actually went over on their goal. And I'm thinking, you know, when I grew up, I don't remember people being hungry. I know I was always hungry when I was growing up, but I mean, there was always food. You know, you could always find food, but I'm thinking, where are all these people coming from? Why are people, I mean, just massive amounts of food. How come it's supposed to be the richest nation and all this, you know, is it really true? Is that, you know, we've got welfare, we've got food stamps, we've got this, that, one thing and another, and there's still, these food banks are huge warehouses full of food that they give away every year. And I mean, they give it away, they don't keep it, it's gone. And you just wonder, you know, I know there are poor people, I know there are people that are in need, and but I just wonder, you know, how could there be that many? But it's all gone. You know, Jesus said 2,000 years later, you're going to have poor people in your day and age. You know, you'll have them with you always, even to the end of the age. I mean, they're going to be poor people. He said, but when somebody has an act of worship, we're not to question or to belittle it. You know, he said for this instance that it was for his burial. So anyway, in verse 11, it says, then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went into the chief priest and said unto them, what will you give me that I will deliver him unto you? And they coveted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he sought opportunity to betray him. You know, it's kind of interesting. After this, Judas is the one that brings it up. Jesus counters it. What does Judas do? He goes out and makes a deal with Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin to betray Jesus. You know, and you think about that, how he's been with him all this time. And this whole time, he's seen everything that Jesus has done. He's seen all the healings. He's seen the miracles, one after another. But yet in his heart, he still doesn't see Jesus as a Savior. He doesn't see Jesus as Messiah. You say, how can that be? Well, remember we just talked about the millennial and those that are going to go into the millennium. It's going to be a perfect environment. Just think, if you had a a teacher like Jesus. Instead of me standing up here, what if we were all sitting here and Jesus was up here teaching us for 3 years? How could you not just be overwhelmed by all the knowledge, all the wisdom? You know, I'll get stuff wrong from time to time, or, you know, might not be sure about something, but when you ask Jesus something, he knows it completely, inside and out. There's no doubt, because he is the law, he is the word, he is, you know, God, he knows everything. And it's just amazing to me that Judas could do this. A lot of people say, well, you know, Judas was just a poor, you know, he just got off track. No, he had this way in his heart the whole time. And all the time that he was there, you know, it said that he took from that bag. He was the one that carried the money, and he's the one that, he was a robber and a thief. Anyway, for 30 pieces of silver, we all know what that means. That's the price of what? A slave. Yeah. In the Old Testament, when you bought or sold a slave, it was for 30 pieces of silver. And he sought an opportunity to betray him. Now, next week, remember this verse, because there are going to be things that's going to go along in the chronology of events and things that Jesus has them do. And you're going to say, well, why did he do that? We'll come back to this verse, because this is the verse that tells us why a lot of the things Jesus did the way he did them during the last few days, was because he didn't want Judas to know where he was going to be exactly at any given time, so he could find him at a private moment and betray him. He didn't know if he was going to be at Simon the leper's house, or if he was going to be in Bethany, or if he was going to be in another area, or here or there. He didn't know, and this is the important part, and you're going to see it if you'll read ahead. Judas didn't know until they arrived there where they were going to have the Last Supper or observe the Passover. So, you know, just think of that. I'm going to read this next deal, and then we're going to wrap it up. In verse 17 it says, "Now the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying to him, Where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover?" Okay, now this is what I want you to get ready, because next week is going to be really good. We were kind of in setting up everything for next week, and there was, when you look at this, it says it was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the disciples came to Jesus saying, so we know it was the first day of unleavened bread, which they counted actually would be the Passover. So I want you to read all the way from verse 17 all the way through the end of the chapter, and figure out this timeline, because there was something that came up and totally embarrassed me when I read John MacArthur and listened to his explanation of something that I've never, for 40 years I've been studying and reading this. Something so blatant, and you may have already known it, already have seen it, but there's just, in this, I want you to read it, and we'll talk about it next week. And I'm still, I've got some things that I've got to get in my mind just right before I teach that. So pray for me this next week, because for me to explain it right, it's hard for me to understand. But when you hear it, when you see it, if you haven't seen it before, it'll blow your mind. I promise you, next week, if the Lord doesn't return next week, you'll get your money's worth, even though it's free. But anyway. Does anybody have any questions or any comment? In this, what I want you to concentrate on is what they did that night and what happened on Friday. So that's kind of what we're going to look at. Anyway, if there's no questions on that, wanted to also, Friday is when they're having the meal. Anybody have any word on that? The meal for the football players and the police? Anybody help me out, because I don't go along with, I mean,
39 football players, I think 5 coaches and assistant coaches, and then the policeman is on duty.
it'll be
And,
policemen, football players, and the coaches.
we're figuring on at least, probably at least 50.
Okay.
We serve at least 50. Because we serve at 4 o'clock.
At 4 o'clock. And they don't be served before, so I know you guys have already got it planned out, but that's coming up, and that's a good thing, I think, for exposure, for part of the community to see our church that might not otherwise get a chance, and see the people that are here, so, plus, you know, when you eat these ladies cooking, you can't leave here without just being happy anyway.
Well, the chicken has been donated, and the church is gonna provide the vegetables and stuff like that, but the, ladies of the church or the men, whoever wants to, gonna be responsible for the desserts and the,
That's what I like.
cookies and brownies. So if any of you can, deal with make cookies or brownies, they need to have them here, since we're gonna start serving at 4. So we need to have them here, I think Van Darlene's gonna be here at least about 12:30. So if they want to bring something, you know, then they can bring it.
Well, that's-
Who says they're bringing ice?
We're gonna eat.
Eat it with your brownies and cookies, that's what I do. I look forward to that dessert line, that's for sure. So get the formalities out of the way, let's get to dessert. Are there any other announcements or anything? Anybody?